Maddie was moping on the couch, missing the times when Danny was little and they were so close. Though Jack tells her that they all gotta grow up sometime while playing with action figures, then headed off to get to the door when someone rang the doorbell. He tossed them a nickel and told them to get some sun. They were pale as a ghost, completely missing the fact that they were indeed actually a ghost, and brought the mail to Maddie since it had her name on it. Opening it up, she starts to read it and gets excited, and we cut to Danny trying to duplicate himself, only managing to create a second head, sighing, saying that he had to keep practicing, as we hear Maddie calling down to her son, and making him change back to human and hide Cujo from them. Thankfully getting them hidden just as Maddie walked down to the lab, telling him to pack his bags, because they're going on a special mother-son trip to Florida. Danny raises an eyebrow, and then we later cut to Danny leaving Sam in charge of things, telling her that Cujo should be able to help them should anything happen ghost related, and asking her to keep an eye on him for a bit, which she'd agreed. Reading the paper, Danny tells his mom that Dalv is just Vlad backwards, but she says it's probably coincidence before we then cut to them out on a plane. While on the plane, Danny tells his mom that none of this seems right. Though they were headed in the direction of Florida, they first had to fly over other states, as the pilot was telling them to see the Virginian mountains if they looked out their window, and continued, but started to have some sort of turbulence that caused them to have to bail from the plane as it almost crashed. But the pilot got it stabilized soon after, and Danny and Maddie had used the parachutes nearby to jump. Danny sighed, saying, "Great, there goes their ride," as we later cut to Maddie chopping her way through some forest area bushes, with Danny sighing, saying that they weren't getting a signal on his cell phone and something was jamming his deputy plumber's badge from being able to contact anyone. Maddie says that she's fine roughing it until they found a working phone, and then came across a large building that looked rather beautiful, and Danny suggested they could stay there, which she agreed to. They hear someone honking and turn to see Vlad Masters pulling up in a golf cart, asking what they were doing there. Though both he and Danny knew exactly why they were there, Maddie didn't seem to have caught on. Vlad offered them a gift basket that the resort had given him, and Maddie walked over, sitting down beside him, with Vlad asking Danny if he was coming, referring to him as son, though made it seem as though it was just something an older person would call a kid. Danny gets onto the vehicle, telling Vlad he's onto them, to which they told him that he wouldn't have it any other way before the three drive off. We cut back to what Jack and Jazz were doing, as she tells her dad that she was headed on out, and her dad tells them to be careful, teenage boys were wild animals. And she opens the door, seeing a very large rabbit ghost bigger than Jack appear to attack them. But before they could react, Cujo tackled them, barking and growling menacingly, fighting with them. Jack was about to blast both of the ghosts, but Jazz stopped him, reminding them that Cujo was Danny Phantom's dog, and they helped fight against the evil ghosts, which he nodded, remembering, and used his new toy, the Jack-o'-nine-tails, to grab the rabbit ghost, and Jazz grabbed a Fenton thermos and blasted them with it, capturing the rabbit as Cujo then ran off. Cutting back to what Danny and Maddie were doing, we see Vlad asking them what brought them to his little getaway, to which Maddie told him about the turbulence where they were supposed to go and having to bail, along with the pilot getting it stabilized at the last second just before they crashed, stranding them there because they couldn't call out as Danny's cell phone and deputy plumber's badge weren't able to reach anyone outside. Danny tells them that it's an incredibly well-planned coincidence, which Vlad says that was an oxymoron. Speaking of, how's Jack? Which Danny's eyes flashed green at, Vlad joking about Danny's scary eyes before firing ghost rays from his eyes at Danny, with him going intangible, making them hit the back of the chair instead. Maddie looked up, hearing the commotion with the ghost rays, but was met by Vlad standing next to her, saying that he wanted to apologize for Jack's behavior during the reunion, with Danny asking asking, wasn't his dad possessed by some pathetic and lonely single ghost? Making Vlad blast a ghost ray from his finger at Danny. Danny fired a ray back at Vlad, with the two shots canceling each other out, Vlad telling Danny that he's improved, confusing Maddie since she didn't see any of that, though he just cut back to the conversation telling her that he'd forgiven Jack for many things over the years, the ecto-acne, the backwash incident, and so on. Giving them a funny look, Danny says he'll go find a phone, leaving the room. With him gone, Vlad asked Maddie if she was exhausted from that mistake they made years ago, to which she sighed, saying that everyone makes mistakes, but she wouldn't have Danny if not for it. So good and bad sort of situation. She couldn't give her son up for anything in the world. We cut back to Danny, who was searching for a phone, finding a room with RVs in it, and then continuing searching. The next room he checked having four-wheelers, then gets up to the roof finding a helicopter but no phone. Cutting back to Maddie and Vlad, we see him asking something about Danny and knowing the truth, but she says that they already know the truth. Vlad sighs, looking at an old book, saying how he wished it so. Had he known, he wouldn't have let them go so easily, shutting the book and putting it back onto the shelf, looking remorseful, and his eyes filled with sorrow, sighing softly as Maddie tells him that she needed to freshen up, and so left to go find the bathroom, Danny slamming the door behind her once she was gone far enough, and asking Vlad just what that was about. Vlad telling him that it was just him trying to rekindle an old flame with Danny's mother, one he thought she'd still held on to. They used to date back in college, but he was too blinded by the ecto-acme and drove her away and into the arms of that fat oaf Jack Fenton, with Danny giving him a funny look, saying, ew. Vlad changed it into Plasmius and asked Danny to show them just how much he'd learned between their last little skirmish, and blasted at him with Danny going ghost and throwing up a shield, Vlad telling him that he was impressed. He was learning. The two continued the fight, with Danny asking how he could have 117 rooms in this place and not have a phone, though he tells him that there's a reason it's called a getaway, as they continued to fight. Danny tried to do the ecto thing with the screaming, but it didn't really work, Vlad knocking Danny back into the door and making him drop down, though he tells them that he and his mother would eventually come to him willingly, one way or another, though Maddie was about to come back, and so the two quickly changed back to human form so she didn't try to attack the two of them. Seeing Danny, she asked if he'd found a phone, but he says that he doesn't have one here, and they needed to get back because he had school tomorrow. Maybe they could use Vlad's helicopter he'd found up on the roof to get home though, while side-glancing at the elder half-ghost. Sighing and playing up the role, he agreed to that, letting them leave with the helicopter to get back to Amity Park.